I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
That's because they think I'm what?
That's because your students think you're part Republican.
Part Republican. Yeah, I think I am part Republican. I'm part Republican. I'm part independent, part Democrat, probably.
Students don't like anything other than progressive.
You know, what's so funny is that we just are in the middle of a strike. The graduate students, you remember being a graduate student wasn't really like a lucrative career, and it's true still today, as when you were studying, category theory way back in the day. But this time, the United Auto Workers have formed a union for graduate students at the University of California, and they've been on strike for a month, and they're not getting paid, and they're not teaching classes, and they're not taking classes. But you know how recently the New York Times employees went on strike? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
So Elon Musk, tweeted out woke versus woke, that that they're the woke writers of the New York Times are striking against the woke employer, the New York Times. And it's very similar with, graduate students are striking against professors who used to be graduate students, all of whom are in the same persuasion politically, 99%. It's like, Twitter politics. And so we have this, kind of battle, Kramer versus Kramer, woke versus woke, where the students are claiming that, the professors are evil capitalist pigs and exploiting labor, and the graduate students, which is true. I mean, the graduate students living in La Jolla, California, is not very cheap, nor is it to live in Berkeley or Westwood or Brentwood, California. But
First off, living in La Jolla is great. Even if you could afford to live there at
it
all.
is great.
Like the most beautiful town in the United States.
Yeah, it might be. Santa Barbara, very similar as well. Any place where the tagline is that it's a place for the newlywed and the nearly dead. I mean, you're going into a place that's going to bankrupt you if that's where you're going to live. But of course, the cities grow up around the universities, right? It's a great place to have a family, to have culture, to have education, obviously, to have. I mean, we built a train track that goes from campus now to downtown San Diego. It's on billions of dollars. I was actually featured as a picture on the side of the train recently. But the point about the strike is, the graduate students in physics are very different from a graduate student in anthropology or something like that. And yet they're all on strike. And the thing that, concerns me is that if I ask my graduate students, who I think I treat well, if I said, well, why don't you ask your med school friends, how much they get paid to go to graduate school and get professional training, they'll say negative $40,000 a year because they have to pay to go to medical school or law school or whatever.
That's true, but Brian, I could argue both sides. I could say, on the one hand, the grad students, they're going to get the benefit of a PhD, and then they could go off and make whatever. But at the same time, you guys get huge multi-million-dollar grants, and then grad students really are cheap labor to work on those grants.
Oh,
So
it's
they have
worse
a
than
point.
that. I agree, and it's worse than that because we've actually outsourced a lot of the labor to China and other parts of the world because we couldn't, quote unquote, couldn't find the labor pool that we needed for graduate students in the U.S. But that just made the problem worse because the Asian students that come, literally from I mean, I have 1,000 applicants a year for 3 spots or something, from Asia and they're perfect test scores and great training, and so it's almost impossible to keep up with it. But that was a very deliberate policy of the National Science Foundation in the 60s and 70s and 80s, to kind of reduce the cost of capital and labor for research to be conducted.
Well, let me ask
But
you a
the thing,
question.
yeah,
By step two, which was your almost Nobel Prize winning project, how much in grants did you get to support that project? Like the dollar amount?
I mean, over probably over its lifetime, 20 million plus,
Okay, and
most of which was
how
federal.
much into
Mhm.
equipment and costs that were, fixed like that?
It was probably about half, maybe
Okay, so
50-50.
you had 10 million for labor, and how much
Yeah.
did you pay the grads? You didn't pay the grad students anything to work on that. How much do you have to pay the school?
They got 350 an hour, James. Come on, don't be ridiculous. No. Okay, so there's a couple of misconceptions. One is that the professor controls their salaries, which we don't. We get a
Oh no,
grant
I
and
understand
it
that. Everybody knows
specifies.
that.
Yeah, but the listeners might not understand it, right? But the other thing is, when you do this kind of research, it's also professional preparation, and the graduate students do get a huge benefit of this work. And furthermore, the thing that I don't like about it is that it's my PhD advisor Peter Timby. He's not only been on my podcast, he came to my wedding. He'll probably come to my second wedding. No, I'm just kidding. He's been intimately involved. I've stayed at his, I love the guy. And to go on strike, it's not like Starbucks employees. Okay, so Starbucks employees, I don't know if this would ever happen, James. Imagine if you are working at Starbucks and then there's a kid.
Okay, right there, that would never happen. Not because I'm a elitist and above Starbucks. It's because they would not hire me. I can't. Well, I tried to figure out how to use like the basic soda machine and stuff at the comedy club that I own. I couldn't even figure that out.
Yeah.
So forget Starbucks.
Well, I'd say they hire you because they want to figure out how to make it, more optimal as a third space for chess players, and they want to understand the
you go.
permutations of lattes and soy and oat milk, and so they're hiring you for your brains, not just for your looks. And when they do that, but you are so desperate to get this position that you write to one of the baristas and you say, "Please write me a letter of recommendation. I am desperate to join, your profession." And immediately, as soon as I get there, I'm going to go on strike because I hate this profession. It's the most, in other words, right now, I'm in the midst of hell, professor hell. I always say being a professor is the hardest 3-hour-a-week job in the world. But every December, it becomes a 6-hour-a-week job because we have to write letters of recommendation. And I don't know if you've ever done a show on like how to write a letter of recommendation. What do you want to do? What do you want to provide? How do you want to tailor it? And I think I looked at my folder. I think I've written like 600 letters in the last 22 years of being a scientist, postdoc, professor. It's a lot. And each one is tailored, and then each individual university that say one of my undergraduates is applying to. So let's say she's applying to 12 institutions. Each institution, Carnegie Mellon, Case Western, Stanford, they all have a different portal. They all have these different permutations of like rate their intellectual capacity and tell me the cohort that you're. It takes like 10 minutes per person per school plus the writing of the actual letter and making a PDF. And then sometimes they won't accept PDF, they want Word. And then I use Mac, and it's a big, anyway, world's tiniest violin, okay? But the bigger point is that they are desperate to get this, and I'm happy to provide them these letters of recommendation. But you wouldn't have that situation where people are desperately trying to become coal miners, right? Or are desperately wanting to work in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1906, right? Where they're just like, it's awful. They're basically slave labor conditions, child labor. In other words, this is a very prestigious thing. We also have a surplus of incredible. I mean, we turn away 6 or 7 incoming graduate school classes. So my bigger point is that people want to work in this field, and yet they're also going on strike, and they're striking against the very people who share their ideology. It's a very unusual situation to be in because we share their ideology politically.
I ultimately agree with you. I just think all these situations you're describing, like, I don't think grad school is necessary at all, period. And I don't think.
Why do you say that?
I
Now we're fighting. Now those are fighting words. Okay, let's take
the
that
New York
apart.
Times is necessary. Like, when was I mean, no, I don't get my news from the New York Times, and I'm pretty up on all of the news on both the left side and the right side and the middle, all the many things in the middle. I've seen personally the effect of the useless op-ed page in the New York Times. And so and that's the most prestigious newspaper in the world. And I've seen so many articles where I knew people who were covering the articles who documented for me all of the actual lies, and the reporters even knew the lies were there. Like the New York Times, I'm not saying every established media is useless, but probably it's the case that 90% of established media, particularly the most prestigious ones, are useless. Not prestigious, I'm willing to bet they're more interested in reporting the news. But the New York Times is so desperate; they just want clicks.
Have you been red pilled, James? Have you been red pilled by Elon? What's going on?
No,
here?
but look, the New York Times has covered me on several occasions, and I
I
can
know.
even see
And featured an op-ed by your enemy, right? An
like
op-ed
Jerry
about a
Seinfeld,
LinkedIn guy.
It was like a useless piece of crap. So sorry for the language.
Yeah.
But
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's your podcast.
I got today an email about that op-ed. It's 2.5 years later. Could people just lose my number on this already? Like, it's ridiculous. So
you don't believe that, all so the publishing, the media is sort of doomed in one sense, but on another sense they're essential. I still look at it. You still look at it. You just admitted that you look at the New York Times.
No,
but on occasion,
I actually never once look at the New York Times.
Yes, you
when
don't.
Jerry Seinfeld writes an op-ed about me, I look at the New York Times, but that's it.
I had an article written recently about me, and I'm not doing this to sound elitist, but I'm just like, I don't have the time to like read about myself, and I'm it's not like I'm so like I said, I'm not saying this from elitist point of view. There's an old joke like a professor gets mad because he's only been featured twice this month on the school's website. It's but the point is like, I'm actually here. I want to discuss this with you. I've had the best year of my life in a lot of ways. And it's partially why I want to come on the show, because this whole year you and I didn't speak to each other until right now in December. We haven't spoken, basically this whole year.
Is that right? We haven't done a podcast since last year.
I think so. We might have done one when my Galileo book, audiobook came out, but I don't remember 100%. And that's why it's been the greatest year of my no. So I missed you, but I want to share some things, and I want to discuss, some other things just on how to handle success, because I think, you've been incredibly successful. You've been incredibly influential, not just on me, but on millions of people. And yet I think I've come to a point, and I shared this with Ryan Holiday, the humble dropping of a name, who I have issues with in some ways, as from the pandemic and his kind of, overarching concern about it to, to like not asking about, how is James feeling? It's just like, did you get your 8th shot or what?
I would say Ryan's a great writer, and I love his books on Stoicism, and he's always
Me too.
really interesting things, and he's a good guy.
And I call him my Stoic rabbi. So I won this award. Speaking of graduate students, I was the recipient of the 2022 Horace Mann Medal from Brown University, where I got my PhD. And I gave a speech in commencement alongside Nancy Pelosi, outgoing Speaker of the House. And she was speaking to the undergrads. I spoke to the graduate students, and it was very, it was very moving. My kids came, my wife came, all expenses paid trip. I got this huge medal, like Flavor Flav, and it was lovely. It was an incredible thing. But I wrote to Ryan, like when I won it, I wrote to him and I said, I just wanted to let you know you've had a big effect on me because I won it. And I was like, let's say I didn't win it, would I be depressed? Like, would I be bummed out to know I hadn't won the Horace Mann Medal from Brown University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world? And I said, no, like, it wouldn't hurt me. Like I lost a Nobel Prize, like there's only, very few places you can go down. Actually, in my speech, I said, now I have to express my hostility because now I can no longer write the book losing the Horace Mann Medal. But besides all that, I felt indifferent, James. It was a very strange thing because as a professor, you're always trying to accumulate accolades and get, raises and teaching promotions and this and that and sabbaticals. I mean, it's funny because graduate students want to become postdocs. Postdocs want to become professors. And then professors want to not teach and get sabbaticals and go back to basically doing research like a graduate student. So it's kind of weird that we're in this weird habit trail of life as an academic.
This is all an important thing. Like you say, if you hadn't gotten it, first off, when you did get it and when you were told that you got it, what was your reaction?
It was I want to say I don't want to say embarrassment, but I felt like all these prizes and awards. I actually felt proud of myself for being indifferent because I always had this question, James. If I did win the Nobel Prize, would my life have been different? If we hadn't made the mistakes that we made and the errors and so forth, not blunders, not stupid. I mean, bicep is still going on, as I just said. I never knew like what would happen. Like, would I turn it down? Would I, use it as a platform to rail against it? Or did I still kind of worship it the way I did as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old scientist? And it's not the same thing. Obviously, winning an award from a Ivy League institution is great, but it's not the same as the Nobel Prize.
No, it is really getting acknowledged for anything that you've done by a group of your peers is a very exciting thing. And look, I want to address this directly. Like you said, you felt indifferent, but often when bad things happen to us, like let's say you hadn't gotten tenure, let's say for instance, you didn't get the Nobel Prize, you wrote an entire book about your frustration of not getting the Nobel Prize. It's very important that you're in a field, physics. It's very important that a lot of things are going to happen that disappoint you, and you're going to also have a lot of successes, particularly if you're ambitious and you love physics and you want to succeed. Good things will happen, but also bad things will happen. Like you won't win certain prizes and everything. It's very important that you are more happy on the good things than you are sad on the bad things. You have, let's say, a certain
Mm,
amount of well being in the bank, and you
yes.
withdraw well being when you're upset about the bad things, but you need to replenish and celebrate the good things, or the result is burnout. Like the result is you run out of emotional fulfillment in what you love doing. And when that happens, you're burnt out. Like literally. You've taken too much oxygen out of your passion and there's nothing left. So it's burnt.
Mm.
And I think this is very important that you should be happy getting this Horace Mann Award. You should celebrate. You should go out with the wife. You should tell all your friends. You should write a blog post. You should give a great talk and all
Yeah,
of
I
that.
mean, I actually turned it back, because if I've learned nothing, it's to, from you, it's to, shamelessly self promote myself at every opportunity. So my talk was called Think Like Galileo. I gave the commencement speech for the graduate school. And, of course I had the product tie-in to my book, audiobook. But in reality, I did kind of use it to present these correlations with these things like accolades. Like when there was no Nobel Prize with Galileo, right? That didn't exist until 1901. But Galileo instead did win this prize at the time. It was called the Academy of the Lynx. The lynx is like a little giant, kitty cat. That's a wild cat in Italy, I guess. Has big eyes and a big ear, so it has a lot of like sense organs. So scientists would associate like someone who's very smart, like a wise old owl. To them, it was the lynx.
Mm.
And so they had this Academy of the Lynx called the Linnaean Society. It still exists. And Galileo won it. And he said many, many amazing things when he won it. But ever since then, he won it in 1613 or something after his first major book, The Sidereus Nuncius, The Starry Messenger. which revealed that Jupiter was like a mini solar system with moons going around it, not the Earth, and that upheld the Copernican worldview. Now, once he received this accolade, he then, on every single one of his books thereafter, and he wrote like 10 more books, he wrote member of the Academy of the Links underneath, his underneath his name. And so that accolade meant a tremendous amount to him.
Of course, it meant a tremendous amount to him. And you make a point where he used it not only was he proud of it and probably celebrated it, but he used it to acquire future career success because it's an authority figure or an authority body said you're a great scientist, and people. It's just natural human instinct. People want authority to get affirmation that they're associating with the right people and the right ideas and so on. So it's, again, extremely important to celebrate these things and not downplay them and to mention them. Not, of course, to the point where, like you were saying, it gets too self-promotional, but you should just be proud of what you do. And these things are important in society, and society recognizes them.
I guess, the next level, in Judaism that we share and we've talked about many times, there's different levels of charity. Jews have as many words for different, kind of societal things as Eskimos allegedly have for snow, right? So like Jews have like 20 different names for love and like 10 different names for charity and kindness and everything. But one of the concepts within the concept of philanthropy is the notion of the different levels of giving charity. So the first level is give nothing, right? The second level is you give the minimum, which is 10%. And this is all in the Talmud, which is the second holiest book in Judaism. But there's a limit. There's a maximum. You're not allowed to give more than 20%. Have you ever heard that, James? You have to give
No, I
10%, which is like a tithe, a tenth, but there's a maximum of 20%. And why do you think there would be a maximum?
Because perhaps it's ego. So your ego doesn't get too big. Like, oh, I'm the benefactor of this. If you love this,
right? Because who's the
hospital-
ultimate benefactor according to the Talmudic rabbis? Who's the ultimate benefactor in space? God, right? So, like, oh, you're better than God. Like, without James Altucher's, $10,000 check, it's just 20% of his net worth, whatever. Oh, this guy, like, the whole world would be poor. Give me a break. So it's to keep your ego in check. I think that's very interesting because, like, you might say, well, give all your money away and just be poor, and that's the highest. No, but then even then, you shouldn't just the highest thing is not just giving a guy a check. As Jesus, a great Jew, said, teach a man to fish and he'll have fish for his whole life. Give a man a fish, he'll eat for one day. So the highest level is actually to give anonymously, so that nobody knows, to put your name on a building. And then the ultimate highest level is to anonymously give somebody a job, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Like, how can you anonymously give someone a job? Because then they're self-sufficient, then they don't need you, and then your ego's not bound up with it because it's anonymous. So you'll never be. So I kind of feel like, in some ways that when I think about these, kind of levels of different accolades, that maybe it should be that indifference is. I hear what you're saying because I actually like that people put their name on a hospital. Like here in San Diego, there's a hospital named after Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm, and his wife, and they've given billions of dollars away, and they always put their name on it, and it inspired me to give a substantial amount of money to the food bank, which has their name on it. But I think it's good because then it motivates, but it should be done and you see it like Jeff Bezos just gave like $100 million to, I don't know, ACLU or some, left-wing charity or whatever, or his wife did to Planned Parenthood and ex-wife, Mackenzie. That's fine. You can do whatever you want. But I mean, the highest thing is to do it without anybody knowing it.
Usually I agree with kind of these, it's always very interesting how the secondary philosophies of all of these things that are in the Jewish religion that you don't normally think about, this idea of giving anonymously, for instance, is the highest form of charity. But I don't agree with this because, like you said, I think putting your name on it does inspire people to follow. Like there's science about this. Like if others are doing something, you're more likely to do it. So
that's true.
If
that is true. Yeah,
currently in the hotel are recycling their towels, then you're more likely to recycle your towel.
By the way, you should never do that. You should never do that. They're doing it to save money, okay? And they're leveraging your social welfare aspects. But the more people that do that, the less work there is for the housekeepers, and eventually they have reduction in the amount of housekeeping staff, And, people don't realize that it's actually, just set up so the hotel can save money on housekeeping staff
Right.
and
So
not give as many tips
great.
because you're actually less likely to give a tip to your house. Do you give a tip to when you stay at a hotel? I know you never leave your house, but theoretically, do you give a tip and how much do you give?
I always give a tip. Yeah, and I always give a little bit more than would be considered normal because
Okay.
I
That's
want them to
great.
remember me.
Yes.
So
And there's a practical benefit. If you leave something behind, which I was just in Chile for like 4 nights. Imagine going to Chile, a 5,000-mile trip for 4 nights. I was just there at a nice hotel down there. And it's like they pay their staff, $5 a day or whatever. But I knew I was going to forget something. And I always tip, like, even when I'm there. Like, I used to do it. By the way, never tip the whole time that you stay. Never tip the last day. Did you know that? You shouldn't, like, some people, I used to do that. Like, oh, when I leave, I'm going to leave, $50, $30, whatever it is, $10 a day, but never do that because they have different staff on different days. So you might miss the man or woman who's cleaning the
my
day
my
that
my issue is I don't when I stay in a hotel I don't get housekeeping at all until the end.
you
So
don't, you just keep do not disturb on there.
yeah,
That's smart. I guess that's smart.
I just
I
like
like
I
it.
just like
They put a
privacy.
chocolate on your pillow but they tuck in your sheets so tight. I can't stand that. They tuck in my sheets.
But to the point, really, though, of the anonymity and charity, I used to believe that. Now I don't, because I do see the effects
Mm-hmm.
of when you do something and people are inspired by what you did. There's likely to be more charity later on.
And
And
that's what I'm talking into with like accolades. So like, to not accept, by the way, the Nobel Prize in physics, I believe is the only prize in chemistry. Those are the only prizes that no one's ever rejected. In other words, people have turned down the literature prize, people turned down the peace prize, people have turned down the whatever other prize, but they never turned down the physics or chemistry prize. And that is, as I say in my first book, Losing the Nobel Prize, a function of the idolatry that we have towards these prizes. And I guess I felt like, who am I trying to impress? Like, either with charity, okay, that makes sense. Maybe with science, like someone will look up to me if I won a Nobel Prize, but they wouldn't. But like, there's so many other metrics. And I guess this year, I won another award at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. I was inducted
what
into
was the
the
award?
it's called the International Aviation Hall of Fame Award. And it's been given out to, Amelia Earhart and to Charles Lindbergh and to Neil Armstrong and Brian Keating now. And I was one of several winners and I really felt insecure. I mean, I
Basically,
really
a group of Nazis it was given out to.
no, there were some communists. There were a couple commies in there too.
All right.
Don't. All right. So now, when I won that, I really felt like the imposter syndrome. Ironically, after you and I you wrote the foreword, co-wrote the foreword with Barry Barish, winner of the 2017 Nobel Prize, to the wonderful book "Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner," James Altucher foreward.
Which I did feel
That book is all.
imposter syndrome writing that forward.
So I was like, thank you for giving me this gift of now. In my acceptance speech, by the way, they didn't. If you're giving an award, at least tell the person you're going to have to give an acceptance speech. I didn't know I'd have to give an acceptance. So until I saw the other guy ahead of me who had like started the school called Top Gun that the movies are based on, Dan Peterson, who wrote a book about that called Top Gun. So he won it like a minute before me. Then he gets up there, gives this like tear-jerking speech, and I'm like, what the hell? I didn't even know how to give a speech. So I get up there and I said, for the first time in my life, I'm wondering if I'm even good enough to have the imposter syndrome. I've been in this crowd of like the guy who runs all Army helicopters around the world, this major general, and then like an astrophysics professor. But my wife, Sarah, helped me out a lot. She said, look, Brian, you've taught tremendous number of people. You've flown like kids with cancer and burn victims around the world in a tiny little Cessna. You've done a lot for aviation, but mostly for space and learning about space and teaching space at the level and the scale that I teach. I shouldn't be embarrassed. And so with her help, she helped me see that. But again, these things now I'm enjoying because my kids are finally old enough to come to these events and I don't have to go alone. And that used to be kind of a drag, even though it was nice to give a speech or get an award. But now I do feel like, like my mortality, I'm 51 and I'm thinking about life, in just a different frame of mind where it's not, here's another example. My rabbi, who I loved and married me and did the eulogy for my father at his funeral 16 years ago. He moved to Israel and we have a new rabbi in the temple that I go to. And I felt like a little bit that I had been abandoned by this. He's like a father figure to me after my father died, and now he's in Israel, and he always wanted to. And then there's a new rabbi who's wonderful, and he and his wife, are now the rabbi and Rebbitzin. It's called the woman, the wife of the rabbi for my children. And I was like, how selfish am I? Because I was like mourning the fact that I don't have this rabbi in my life on a daily basis anymore. But how great I should feel for my kid. Like, I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to get more comfort, more satisfaction from helping other people rather than like trying to climb some ladder of success. But I'm worried, James, because there is sort of that elan vital, as they call it, that life energy, that vitality that you have when you're questing after something, bestseller, to win an Oscar, a Nobel Prize. Like, if I don't have that anymore, I think I'm healthier. I think it's better, for society where the person doesn't care so much about him or herself, but more about their family, their community, their society. But I think on a personal level, perhaps that's going to diminish my vitality or my,
Sure.
kind of my emotional attachment to my own victories. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a really fundamental question that is a life question. Like, at what point in life do you let um, kind of elder statesmanship take over after youthful ambition and passion? And
Hmm.
when you're young, and it depends on the profession, but like in physics, math, science, and many other professions, the peak age for most professions, actually, and for sports, the peak age is in the 20s or 30s. For physics, certainly, it's probably the peak age where people do their peak research is in their 20s and 30s. Doesn't mean
Hmm.
that's true for you. It's just an average.
Hmm.
And you can argue Einstein was in his 20s when he wrote his most useful papers. Not his most cited paper, by the way, which is the one where he says God doesn't roll dice. That was much later in his life, which is
That's
his
right.
actual most cited paper. But his theory of relativity was when he was in his 20s. But at some point, it needs to shift over. Your the metric by which you're defining your success, I feel, needs to shift over to how much am I influencing and helping the next generation, the people who will inherit my passion for a subject and go even further with it.
Hmm.
There's so many conflicts that have happened through history between mentors and mentees. When the mentee starts to rise above the mentor, but the goal of the mentor is to make the mentee, the student, better than the teacher.
Right, which is again, by the way, coming back to where we started with graduate students, that's my goal. My goal is that my graduate students should exceed me, and in every way, but financially is like the least important part. I know it's important for them, and it was important for me, but nobody goes into being a grad student to make money. So what are you doing it for? You're doing it so you can exceed the person you're apprenticing with. Again, graduate school is like an apprenticeship in a lot of ways. But I do agree with you. But does that diminish your own ability to then continue succeeding? Mhm.
Well, your success will be different. It does diminish the ability to come up with the next theory of relativity, to come up with the next concept that's going to win the Nobel Prize. That does diminish, and your ambitions kind of will naturally change. And for those who don't, like, they become less happy because when you're in your 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, your ability to come up with new concrete research that changes the world does get less. So you have to, and then your ability to write it up, and then your ability to fight for credit, and your ability to publicize it. All of these things get less, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily true that your need for these things gets less. That you have to sort of train yourself to say, look, now I've done this. Now, how can I do this to go to this next stage in my life? And whether I'm not saying 50 is the dividing line, but lots of things in the brain start to change around the age of 50. For instance, your ability to do complex mathematical reasoning in your brain diminishes,
Mhm.
but many other things change. But what does increase is your ability to recognize patterns. When you see a student who's going through something you've seen other students go through or you've been through, your ability to help them actually increases. So this is why what's the average peak age for a historian is 79 years old. So historians,
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
very different from mathematicians. A good historian depends on learning from the past and then using that to interpret, whatever it is they're analyzing and make then predictions or assumptions about the future. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors.
boost your confidence, and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
What's the peak age for a mentor? You see many of these people in Silicon Valley. They're CEOs for a while, and then they become on boards and are investors and are mentors to the next generation of CEOs. And you don't see them becoming a CEO again. And striving to become a CEO and making the next billion. You see them taking more of this mentorship role, and I think that's probably what you're feeling a little bit. Like I know I in the past few years have felt this extremely. Like let's say from the age of 25 to 45, I was in, or 50 even, I was insanely obsessed with, writing every single day, getting more followers, writing things that were meaningful to people. I wanted to be the best writer in the world. I wanted to be the best entrepreneur. I wanted to ever give great talks, everybody to know who I am, have a podcast with tens of millions of downloads a day. And in the past few years, I think for a lot of reasons, that's become less for me. And
Yeah.
I don't always know why, but I think it's because I'm much more happy now teaching and helping people.
Hmm.
And that really has become a strong part of my life. Like right now, Jay and I are preparing a course, which I'm going to put on Udemy about writing. And I've never wanted to do something like this before, but now I just love this idea of because I've helped so many people with their own writing that the
Hmm.
idea of making a course about it, there's nothing else I'm more interested in than that because I can see that will have an impact on people. I don't need to be famous from it. I have no desire to write, the next best-selling book about writing. I just simply want to teach about it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's part of becoming like a different mindset, which requires that you accept the changes in your own capabilities, which has to do with like when you're young and you are a grad student, you are a postdoc, you are a professor, and you're coming up, you have a flexible mind. You're reading all the papers, you're doing all the tests and stuff like that. And then later in life, you can start to become more consumed with teaching. And you see much of the good teachers, as you said, historians are teachers in a way, right? So for them, to mature and to accept that they're aging and my brain isn't as facile as it was as a 26-year-old or whatever and so forth as when I was in my Einstein prime. But now I'm a better teacher. I have more tools in my toolkit of wisdom. But still, that's separate. That's kind of as Arthur Brooks talks about, like the second brain or whatever. I forget what he calls it specifically, but you mature from this fluid brain to this more kind of toolkit. Like oh,
Yeah.
I remember that exact problem or that chess problem.
So Arthur
From
Brooks calls that you're moving from fluid intelligence to crystallized intelligence.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And
See, I
and
forgot
he
that. I forgot what he called it. That's what my fluid
well, well,
intelligence is
well, that's what
gone.
he mentions also, and this is also known in neuroscience, is that your memory declines. It doesn't mean you're getting dementia. It's just memory just naturally declines. You don't need it as much.
Exactly. I agree. And so, I think in that sense, I've kind of taken a lot more, maybe comfort from or put a lot more of my own self-worth in teaching. But because, the students are on strike, and we can't, get together in person without, violating scab laws or whatever they call it. So it kind of got away from that. But on the other hand, I've started this podcast, the Into the Impossible podcast, thanks in
Think
large
about
part
what
to
you've
you.
done. Yeah, think about what you've done the past few years. You've started a podcast that's been very successful and influential. You've written these great books. Like this latest one on Galileo was a passion of yours. Like you
Yeah,
discovered so much about this saint of physics that you learned so much more by reading his works in the original that it became such a pleasure for you to write this book, and you even give talks about it. Like these are all now ways you're taking this passion for physics and transforming them into what Brian the Elder is doing as opposed to Brian the Younger. Brian the
Right.
Younger was trying to figure out how the universe began. Brian the Older is now just taking pleasure in all these nuances of demonstrating new fascinating things about physics and explaining them. You've explained to me 10
Yeah.
different theories of how the universe began. Like, you could have been working on research instead of that. Instead, you shared all this knowledge with my listeners.
Right. I feel like, I get to teach at scale with my YouTube channel and my podcast and my books. And, whereas a scientific paper, my most highly cited paper has maybe 1,500 citations, and that's the Bicep 2,
Wow.
result paper, which is great. But there's people with 10 times higher, citations on certain papers. And that's kind of the gamification of academia is like how many citations, and not only that, how many papers have a certain number of citations. It's called your H index, which is kind of a metric. Like you could have one paper, let's say you write 2 papers, and one has 0 citations, one has 1,000 citations. So your average citation is 500. But it's really you just had one paper, or you had 100 papers. One has 1,000 citations, and the rest have 0. So there's something called the H index, which is the number of papers that have at least H citations. So if you've written 10 papers and they all have 10 citations, your H index would be 10. But if you've only written 9 papers and they each have 10 citations, then you'd be 9. Okay, so the higher it gets exponentially higher to increase that number to go from like 48, which is my H index now, to 49 means I have to have another, I have to have 49 total papers that have 49 total citations rather than just one that has 1,500, like I said. So it's kind of a quantity times quality metric. And none of these things are perfect. And then you could do all sorts of gamification, modifications where you can, do it by age and cohort and field, because some fields have just way more citations. And then like physics has theory and experiment and computation, break down all those different levels. So, and fun fact, that H index is named after my colleague here at UC San Diego named Jorge Hirsch. H stands for Hirsch. And that's his most cited paper, is his paper about this way to quantify citations of papers. But, so I started to think, like, my YouTube channel, like some of my videos will have 100,000 views, and that's, literally 60 times higher than my highest cited paper. So, like, where should I over-index? Where should I put more of my, and of course, a lot of them are not physicists that are watching it, and that's great. I try to, as you know, I feel scientists have a moral obligation, if we're spending taxpayer money, as we all are, to explain to the taxpaying public what we do. I mean, can you imagine if you were working like for HBO again, and your boss comes in and says, what are you working on, James? And you say, I'm doing something very, very, very specialized and something that you're not capable of understanding. And even though you pay me, I'm not going to break down in terms that you can you'd be fired, in a heartbeat. But we as scientists do that. First of all, we don't do any like kind of training in media. We don't do any kind of way to distill and spread our ideas. We keep it literally locked in this ivory tower, which I think is immoral because, again, your audience and my audience, they were paying my salary. And so, how can I not give back for free, putting on YouTube, putting on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera? How can I not exchange, for them some tangible reward that if they're interested, some people might not be interested, but if they are, I think it's, borderline unconscionable that we do that as scientists. So I've been on a personal mission to do that. There are other people you've had on, like Andrew Huberman, who's kind of similar, although that guy won't return my phone calls, James. That guy, he was a professor here in San Diego about 8 to 10 years ago. And one of the other, kind of year 2022 highlights is that is related to him in a way, in that his close friend and colleague here at UC San Diego is named Gentry Patrick, and I've had him on my podcast. Gentry happens to be African American, and I've known him for longer than I've known my wife. And this summer, he and my wife's cousin got married, and
Wow.
And they asked me to perform the ceremony, and it was done on June 15th, which is known as Loving Day, because that was the day Loving versus Virginia, which ratified interracial marriage, was passed by the Supreme Court, legalizing interracial marriage in the U.S. in 1967. So I was very honored and touched that they asked me to perform. I'd never performed a ceremony, and I had to become a minister. So this year I became, a Jewish minister, and it was a very, it was very arduous, James, to do this because you actually need to have an email address. And if you don't have an email address, you cannot become a minister in the Universal Life Church. So it was arduous, but I became a minister. I have my certificate, and I performed this wedding, and it was a huge highlight for me because I put a lot of thought into it. I figured, I usually don't do things that I'm only going to do once. Like I never like rewire the electricity in my house. Like it's like stupid. You should just get a professional to do it, like you. That would be my goal. But so like but this is so special. I couldn't not do it. So I put a lot of effort into it. And it was a very challenging thing because actually a sad thing, the worst thing that happened to me this year is one of my very close friends passed away very young. His name is Eden Raffaelli, and he passed away. Just literally, he worked at Google X up in the Bay Area, and he just literally collapsed one day at work and was taken to the hospital, and he died a few days later. And he was basically taken off of life support as I'm performing this wedding, and I'm talking with his parents. It was a very challenging day. But and I keep a journal because Ryan Holiday told me I should keep a journal. And I never got back to the connection with Ryan. So when I won this Horace Mann medal, I told Ryan, I told him I didn't feel like I was really changed. Like I said, it was important, but it wasn't like it wasn't like if I hadn't won it, I would have been crushed, like the way I was about the Nobel Prize, say, at one point. And he was like, "That's good, you're like getting there, young Padawan or whatever." So it's nice. He's kind of my stoic rabbi. But at the same time, I feel like I would have been, kind of not. Knowing, let's say they said at the last minute, you can't perform the wedding or whatever, who knows? Then, it would have hurt. It would have, because it's almost like those things mean more than winning an academic award or even a Nobel Prize, right? To do those kinds of things, the spiritual things that nourish the side of your life that only you can do. Like a lot of people have won the Nobel Prize, but only one person has ever performed this particular wedding.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main, that's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com.
This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth.
I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the number one cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. One, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. I mean, and Ryan has a lot of great examples from Stoicism, but I'll look at one example from Buddhism and one example from Judaism. And so in Buddhism, Buddha, of course, started as a prince, right?
Yeah.
He wanted to win wars, he wanted to be a king, all this kind of stuff. Then he was ambitious for what he thought was different definitions of enlightenment. He would try every possible way, like whether to be an ascetic or you know, engage in meditation or whatever it was. He would try all these different ways to get some magical state he called enlightenment. And then finally, whatever state he realized, he really became like an elder and taught a bunch of students, monks, and not only that, was almost a diplomat. Like he his grove was in the middle of three warring kingdoms that were always at
Mm.
war with each other. One of those kingdoms was the one he would have been king of. So it was
Mm.
particularly difficult for him to be a diplomat and to keep all of his monks who were peace loving, to keep them safe. There's a
Mm.
lot about Buddha that people don't realize. He was constantly negotiating to just save the lives of his monks. And he
Wow.
played extreme elder statesman role. Now, take in Judaism, Moses at first was the rising young rabble rouser. He wanted to bring his people, freedom and out of slavery. He's like splitting the Red Sea. He couldn't
Mm.
split the Red Sea in his 70s. He could only do it in his 20s. Otherwise, forget it. And then after that, his whole goal, he didn't even need to get to Israel. His whole goal was to just get his people to exceed his own ambition. His ambition initially was to get to Israel. He never himself got to Israel, but
To
he
the
brought his.
promised land.
So
Right.
this is almost, you know it's throughout history. You see the examples of the people we remember and are, you know not worship, but we think the most highly of, are these people who make this transformation from ambition to statesmanship.
Yeah, and and I appreciate being compared already to Jesus, to Buddha, to
I didn't compare to Jesus because Jesus never made his 50s.
That's right. That's right. We've exceeded the
If we
Jesus
wanted to
life
go into
expectancy.
Stoicism, I would have compared to Seneca and Marcus Aurelius.
Yes. Okay. Good. That'll be when we write our next, next book together. But no, I feel like that is a truism. But to get to that point, and also I see this with fatherhood as well. And I see you and your daughter, going back and forth on Twitter, and that's cute. And I'm looking forward to the day, if I ever allow my kids to be on social media, that they'll be able to do such things.
Can I just add, it's such a pleasure for me. My daughter's tweets are a bit spicy, like,
Yeah,
and
the apple didn't
I
fall
laugh
far
when
from the tree.
I laugh when I read her tweets, and I don't respond to them often because I don't want to, like, get in the way of her own thing.
Right.
But when I do, it's funny. And then one of her friends yesterday tweeted, I can't believe you let your father follow your tweets, given what you tweet. And she tweeted back, he's chill. And that was my highest moment
You're
of the
shepping.
weekend.
That's in Yiddish. That's called shepping nachas. Shepping nachas, when you just are like filled with a kind of maternal pride over something that your kids did. Not to be confused with schlepping nachos, which my kids will never do for me. I love nachos, but yeah, no. I mean, thinking again, it's like taking pride in your kids' accomplishments. Is at a certain level more satisfying than your own, and so it's like, I feel like at some point we always have this inner voice, right? That's but maybe you're trying to live to impress your inner voice or live to impress yourself. I've heard it said, but there's really nobody. Like, I mean, yes, God, you believe in God, you can think about living in accordance with His rules or what have you. But in terms of like, am I an impressive person? Am I doing something impressive? I think the highest form of that, which relates to my ultimate theory of the meaning of life. I mean, Elon wants to go to Mars and he wants to do this and he wants to live forever and he wants to, and that's great. I'm supportive of what he's doing and a lot of his endeavors. But we already can live forever. We just can't bring our physical bodies with us. And that is through the values and the lessons that we teach to our children, where the children could be biological, but they don't have to be. They could be ideological. And I think looking at that in kind of an ethical perspective, that you can extend, maybe not forever, who knows? I mean, there's some saying I heard recently that's depressing. It's like a man dies twice, once when he breathes his last breath and once when his name is spoken for the last time. And,
Right.
We're talking about Moses and Buddha and Jesus and everything now. They're still being talked about.
I think that could be viewed as a positive quote, though. Like, in the sense that I hope for the day. Like, sometimes I talk to 80-year-olds who are very successful, and I say, when does the ambition and constant drive, which also means constant disappointment, when does it end for you? And sometimes they
Yes.
say it never has, and that depresses me because
Yeah.
I want to know that I can transform to not being as ambitious. Like, oh, so and so went on this podcast, but I didn't. So
Right.
I get upset.
Andrew
And
Huberman. Paging Andrew Huberman. No, but you had
and
this with Stephen Pressfield. You had Stephen Pressfield on earlier this year, or maybe it was a repeat. And he was just like, yeah, I didn't. And I think this is true. Please correct me if I'm wrong, James. But he was like, yeah, every book you write as a kid you didn't have, or vice versa, or something like that. Or every kid you have is a book you didn't write. That's what he said. And I found that so depressing because he doesn't have any kids, right?
no, but no, and in fact, that was a podcast we did in 2021 where because the very first podcast I had with him in 2016, he said to me, I was in his house in Malibu actually, and he said to me that he's given up a lot in his life to be a writer. And but I was leaving, I was walking out the door, the podcast was over,
Mm-hmm.
and when he said that, and I always wondered what did he mean by that. So I started off as one in 2021 asking him what did
That's
he mean,
right.
and he actually said, I surprised myself by saying that to you, and I had to think what it meant that I said it to you. Like I've thought about it a lot since then, and look, he really gave up a lot to be a writer,
And I
and
feel
we've
like,
all
is
given
that
up a
worth
lot.
it? Is that worth it? Yes. I mean, let's say that's all you have is that you're remembered for a long time for the books. I mean, Jesus didn't have any kids either, right? And he's still remembered and he still had an influence. So I'm not equating those things together. And by the way, people always say, well, look, why is, because I'm always talking about children, but I don't mean to say that if you don't have children, you're like a loser or you're a failure or you're immoral in any way. But I will say that there are options. You could be a big brother, big sister. You could be an adoptive parent. You could be a foster parent. I mean, there's so many children. We talk about abortion and what should we be able to do and not be able to do. There's so many kids, and I was adopted. And so I know
Oh, I
this.
didn't know that, Brian.
Yeah, my stepfather adopted me, and so my name is not Keating. When I was a child, I was adopted, by my stepfather and my mother, but we changed my name, and so he did adopt me as his own kid, and I wasn't in touch with my father, my biological father, for the next 15 years of my life. But
How come?
I guess what I'm saying is when I have
Well,
when I
how come you weren't in touch with your biological father for the next 15 years?
so he, kind of after the divorce with with my mom, he viewed us, my older brother and I, of the same mother and father. as kind of, being completely under the sway of my mother and her fiance, who became my father, adopted father. And he decided he didn't, have a place in our life, and that we'd be better off without him, and that he'd be better off without us. And so he gave us up for adoption instead of paying my mother and stepfather, alimony and whatnot. He gave us up for adoption. And so I wasn't. So he didn't have the right to keep our names as his name.
How
And
did you regain
so
contact?
in graduate school, when I was at Brown, I had a neighbor in the dorms who had the exact same life history as me. As his father had abandoned him. He was raised by his mother and his stepfather, and he went to, he was a brilliant kid. He came from Turkey. I think his mother was Turkish and his father was an American GI, and they met and after the Korean War or something. Anyway, they so he told me that he had had this reconciliation with his father, his biological father, and it transformed his life, and it transformed um, for the better. Even though he had the same kind of hostility towards his father and how he treated his mother, et cetera. And he told me, like baggage has a handle for a reason, so you can put it down. And by carrying this
That's really
antipathy
cool.
towards my father, I realized it was really eating me up inside. And worse than that, in some ways, was my, his mother also, and his sister had disconnected from me and never had contact with me and my older brother. From the time I was 7, my brother was 10. And so I never saw my biological grandmother again because she ended up dying. And so the exact moment I met this friend of mine at Brown, I somehow got in touch with not so my grandmothers, both my biological grandmothers, lived in the what I call the Jewish mother triangle in southern Florida. So it goes from like New York to Florida to to Boca to Miami to Boca, and then it goes back up. And they communicated not to each other because they hated each other, but through mutual friends that I call the Yentenet, all these Jewish bubbies and nanas and whatever. And so word got around that I was interested in talking to my father, and it also got around that my father's mother was dying of cancer, and she ended up dying before I ever saw her again. I never talked to her again. But before she died, she put my biological father in touch with me, and he and I connected when I was a grad student, and I researched all of his work in math and physics, and we had this connection immediately, and we resumed a relationship after many 15 years of not seeing each other, not talking to each other, no contact whatsoever.
And
But
still getting along now?
well, he passed away in 2006. So
Ah,
yeah, we did reunite, and that was wonderful, and it meant that he could be in the life of my nephews and my brother's life and my sister-in-law. He never met my wife or my kids, unfortunately. But but I forgot why we brought this up. But the kind of living with your kids or through adoption or whatever is fulfilling, and there is this tendency. I don't know, how do you react to this with this notion of what antinatalism is?
no.
There's this push that people shouldn't really have children, and that mankind is sort of a virus on the surface of the earth. It's causing the destruction of planetary resources. It's causing the depletion of the of our habitability zones, of animal life, of plant life, global warming, nuclear war threats, all sorts of things, and that we're effectively like a cancer, a toxin on the earth, and that the moral choice, according to many philosophers and thinkers, quote unquote, now is that you shouldn't have children. And it's curious to me if they think we should commit suicide. And there is actually a move towards assisted suicide and encouragement of suicide in many other countries, as you may know. So there's this thing. Antinatalism means it's the philosophy of not having reproduction, and that is considered by many intellectuals to be a net good for the planet and for I mean, it's so alien to my philosophy that I can't even speak about it because it's cliche, children are our future, whatever. But the you think that the very cure to like global warming will be enhanced with more people on Earth, or reduced? I mean, it's so obvious that technology depends on the flourishment of the existing human
Yeah, and also
civilization.
ever since I had this conversation with Matt really, ever since like the early 1800s, every 10 years, people were saying overpopulation is going to kill us
Right.
in the next 10 years. and it never happened. And life has only quality of life around the world on average has only gotten higher in every decade. And
That's right.
so it's just ridiculous.
Right.
It's a
You told
ridiculous
me
question.
that
Now, I can understand not having children. I did not want to have children.
Mhm.
Most things in my life that I have now, I did not want to have. So
Mm.
it doesn't even matter what you want or don't want. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, so like how can you know though? There are people that I've interviewed many people on the podcast who chose specifically not to have children, whether it's for lifestyle reasons or look at Pressfield, right? I mean, he's basically acknowledged maybe it wasn't intentional, maybe it was that he didn't have children. I guess I feel like I've actually this is where I'm kind of nervous to ask your advice in a certain sense because I feel like that ambition, like I never wrote a book, and then I wrote a book, and then it was with a major publisher with Norton, and then I did a self-published book that you wrote the forward to, Think Like a Nobel Prize winner, and that was great, and it made even more money than the first one. You know what? I didn't get into it for the money. I mean, I probably got paid less than my graduate students. $3 an hour from the Norton advance. And I did an audiobook because I thought, oh, that's really cool. It'll be great to have my voice connect. I did it with Carlo Rovelli and Frank Wilczek and these Nobel Prize winners and brilliant thinkers. And that was kind of a one. But now I'm like, I don't know if I have that ambition like I've ticked those boxes and I'm like, where's the next box? And I realize that's in total, contrast and completely antithetical to what I'm saying before, which is like you should live to impress yourself. You shouldn't care about these awards and accolades and metric. But like I don't like those itches have been scratched, and so to speak. Like I don't feel the need. Maybe that's a good thing. Like I think people write books and there's way too many books, right? I think there's just people write a book because whether it's a cookbook because someone told them they're a good cook or a memoir because someone said, oh, you had a funny story. Well, there's way too many books. And maybe they could say that about my books. I don't know. I like to think that they help, but it's partially narcissism, right? We write books, we like attention, we like book sales, we have publicity, we do these things. I mean, you did it more in the past, you do it less now. But like, is that a warning sign? Like, how do you know when you're when you're over the hill or when how do you know when your lack of ambition as a 50 something could be detrimental to some long-term flourishment?
I think it's a great question because I don't think there's a real answer because first off, a lot of times ambition decreases because of depression. A lot of
Mhm.
times ambition decreases because of less testosterone. So particularly for men over the age of a certain age. Uh, but and should you be doing things like I wonder for myself, should I be focusing so much, for instance, on this podcast as opposed to like starting another business or writing a best-selling book or whatever, or like for instance, I take a lot of my spare time now and I study chess because I'm trying to
Mhm.
get better at something that I loved so much as a child. And am I wasting my time? Am I ruining my talents? But one thing you can remember though is that basically 3 years after everyone's death, nobody remembers you, and that's true for just about everybody. Like, when
That's
was the
the
last
last
time you
breath. Yeah, it's the last time you take a breath and the last time that your name is mentioned, right? I don't know
like?
about 3 years. I mean, you really think it's 3 years? I mean, if we go to my
When was the last
synagogue
time?
and my synagogue temple has a board with people's names that died in the
Yeah, so
1900 late
so you think
1900s,
about
right?
them when you see that board. So it's like
Yeah,
50 people. Think of that when you see that board.
that's right.
But but
Yeah.
but like it doesn't matter how many books you wrote. Like who won the Nobel Prize in 1953? Like we know in
Enrico
1952, I
Fermi.
think it was Ernest Hemingway. But in
Uh-oh,
1953,
writing. Yeah.
I have no idea who won the Nobel Prize in literature. Probably never read any of their books. Probably this year, nobody has read that person's books.
Right.
Uh, and let's just see, 1953 Nobel Prize in literature. But again, most or who President Gerald Ford died, in the past decade or so. He was president of the United States between
Yeah.
Nixon and Carter, like a
Right.
pivotal president that took us from Vietnam to hopefully a more normal period. It took us from the Nixon,
Yeah.
fraud and potential impeachment to the nice Jimmy Carter. And nobody talks about him ever. Nobody
Yeah.
says, "Well, this guy is up there on the list of greatest." He was president of the world, and nobody thinks about him ever, and that was a president.
Yep.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we continue our talk. Nobel Prize loser, Brian Keating. Enjoy.
It's time to save. Clear the Rack is on at your Nordstrom Rack store. For a limited time, take an extra 25% off clearance. All sales are final. Hurry, shop this sale at Nordstrom Rack today. Please see nordstromrack.com or ask a store associate for details.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.